Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where I had a great conversation with everybody's favorite caller, listener, turned expert guest, Bill B. in D.C. Bill Boyle joined me to talk about Henry Kissinger's legacy, according to him, which is a great conversation, really in-depth, fascinating history, his perspective, always valuable on these issues. He's got all kinds of different sources he draws from, and obviously a real student of history that can somehow recall and say all these big words, half of which I don't know, but always great. Learned a lot from this conversation with him, and I think you'll like it. Also, we talked about the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, trying to learn how to govern, the possibility of Nikki Haley winning the Republican presidential primary, and, of course, his latest reaction to Elon Musk's latest overreaction or irrational action. And because, of course, Bill has always been the best, most consistent critic of Elon Musk. The thing we love most about Bill, he's got nothing to plug. He's not doing this for money or for clicks or for popularity, although he would love to have you follow him on social media, on Blue Sky and Twitter, where he exists. And is he on Threads? Are you on Threads, Bill? We'll find out. And if you're in D.C., he'll might buy you a beer. I can't guarantee it. And you should park in his garages. How about that for plugs? We love Bill. Always love when he joins me. We had a great conversation. I think you're going to like it. Let's do it right now. Bill Boyle, Bill B. in D.C. I knew I was going to have to talk to you about Henry Kissinger. So let me just start with, where were you when you found out that Henry Kissinger died?
I hope I was taking a shit, but I don't remember. That would be the appropriate place. Maybe, other than that, it would be like watching as third world people get killed and not caring about it. Those are the only two places you can be to get that news. I think.
How much of what you think and feel about the legacy of Henry Kissinger for you is illustrated by the fact that your wife is a refugee from Vietnam? Because you're really good on a whole bunch of issues that we talk about, foreign policy, but Southeast Asia obviously is very personal to you. You spent a lot of time there, and obviously your wife. So I wonder just if that's animates you more.
No, not really. I thought Henry Kissinger was a piece of shit long before I met my wife. And
okay, I figured that, but I have
to tell you, by the way, as I picked up my kid from school today, I said, I told him who Kissinger was and that he was dead. And, he was like, well, is that a big deal? And I said, well, Finn, it led to the deaths of millions of people, and the war continued for 6 longer years than it needed to. And that being said, no Kissinger, mom really doesn't come to America, and then you don't exist. So I may not have a son, but for Henry fucking Kissinger.
Way to let him arrive at his own opinions.
Well, I told him you're responsible for millions of deaths. That's why you exist. Yes.
Well, just explain that one to me. I think a lot of people don't understand, and I'm not sure how many interpretations there are. To be fair, I'm biased on this. I haven't really looked. I've been reading a lot about it, thinking a lot about it, and I'd heard about this. But you make the point about that the Vietnam War would have ended in 1968 if not for Henry Kissinger. Are you sure about that?
I am not 100% sure, because one can't be completely 100% sure of anything. But let me spell out what Kissinger did, because I don't think most people know this.
Yeah, no, please.
The Johnson administration was negotiating with North Vietnam in 1967, 1968. Kissinger was a consultant to the U.S. delegation to those negotiations, and they were doing okay, actually. Kissinger went to the Nixon people and told them, hey, here's where things are going. The Nixon people were terrified that the war in Vietnam would be resolved, which would very likely have led to a Hubert Humphrey win in the election in 1960.
Just to be clear, so Johnson is president. Vietnam had been raging. Those years were really violent for a loss for Americans, obviously for Vietnamese, always was. And so Johnson said he's not running for re-election, and Nixon is going to be the Republican nominee. He wants to win, which means he needs to keep the war going. And that's just illustrating a little bit, filling in the blanks there. And Henry Kissinger it is basically a go-between between both campaigns to try to solidify himself a position in either?
He wasn't supposed to be a go-between. He was supposed to be working for the Johnson people as a consultant at the negotiations. I believe they were in Geneva.
Supposed to be helping the Democratic president who was...
No. He's supposed to be helping America. This is American foreign policy. He is supposed to be helping the country get to the end of this war, which, by the way, the terms of that agreement would have been a South Vietnam that remained mostly independent still.
That's an important correction by you to me. Now, he wasn't working for Nixon. He's working for the American foreign policy, ending the war.
That's right. And so instead what he does is he goes to the Nixon people. They go to a woman who lived in the Watergate building, ironically enough, named Madame Chennault. Madame Chennault was a anti-communist Chinese woman who married an American Air Force general back in the 40s, super powerful and influential in Washington, D.C. when it came to politics regarding Asia. She then acted as the go-between between the North Vietnamese and the Nixon campaign. And they basically told the North Vietnamese, don't negotiate because we'll give you a better deal. And so North Vietnam backed off of the talks. The negotiations don't go anywhere after that. Obviously, Humphrey loses, and we end up with Nixon, who then does a volte-face, and he decides the way we're going to get a good deal, because even Nixon realized, oh crap, we're not getting the deal that they were offering the Johnson administration, is to do bombing campaigns after bombing campaign after bombing campaign in Hanoi, in the Red River, and of course in Laos and Cambodia, which leads to or greatly drives the rise of the Khmer Rouge.
American bombing drove people into this militant organization, Khmer Rouge.
Sure. Well, it did a bunch of things. It started out, there was the king of Cambodia was a guy named Sihanouk. And Sihanouk was basically pro-communist, but not hardcore, just kind of, he was trying to balance one side versus the other. The bombing leads to him being overthrown and being replaced by a general named Lon Nol, which, yes, you can spell in either direction. It sounds the same. Huh. Lon Nol is this lunatic, crazy guy who is like Nancy Reagan on steroids, using like soothsayers to decide where he's going to send his army and everything else. Lon Nol, because of the American aid he's getting, is super hardcore, attacking the communists. We're bombing the crap out of the plain of Juarez. Cambodians getting killed en masse. And this leads right to Pol Pot, where we just basically destroyed the stability of the country and allowed, Pol Pot makes Al-Qaeda look rational. Like the Khmer Rouge under Pol Pot were absolutely insane. And we through our policy, helped create them. We made the conditions for them. I should put it that way. Now, this leads to something else that also nobody really gets into and talks about, is that after the war, when the Khmer Rouge were murdering and killing Cambodians to the tune of 2 million, I believe, at the end, Kissinger was basically like cozying up to them because they were anti-Vietnam. Like and China was there and still is, or was until the last minute they were in power, was their big supporter. But Kissinger was completely fine with the Khmer Rouge while it was happening. And I have a quote that I wrote down. Kissinger said of the Khmer Rouge, "They are murderous thugs, but we won't let that stand in our way." Like total disregard for the fact that these people were getting murdered in Windrows, because he figured out, I'm not particularly interested in the little people. This is about great power realism and tough shit to be you.
From Spencer Ackerman's piece in Rolling Stone, he says, the Yale University historian Greg Grandin, author of the biography Kissinger's Shadow, estimates that Kissinger's actions from 1969 through 1976, a period of 8 brief years when Kissinger made Richard Nixon's and then Gerald Ford's foreign policy as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, meant the end of between 3 and 4 million people. The end of between 3 and 4 million people is the way Spencer Ackerman writes it. That includes crimes of commission, he explained, as in Cambodia and Chile, and omission, like greenlighting Indonesia's bloodshed in East Timor, Pakistan's bloodshed in Bangladesh, and the inauguration of an American tradition of using and then abandoning the Kurds. We haven't even gotten out of Southeast Asia yet.
Oh, exactly.
In our conversation.
So I can tell you the numbers that I looked up today because I was curious. I hated this guy, and what are the real numbers? 2 million Cambodians, because the Khmer Rouge killed those 2 million people, but the conditions for the Khmer Rouge never happened, almost certainly without Kissinger and Nixon. But our bombing of Laos and Cambodia, we killed 350,000 people bombing Laos. We killed directly another 600,000 people in Cambodia. So just between the Khmer Rouge and our bombing of Southeast Asia, forget about Vietnam, is already 2.9 to 3 million people right there.
That bombing was essentially to stop the movement of weapons on the Ho Chi Minh Trail?
Correct.
But it killed hundreds of thousands of civilians?
Yes, correct. Because they were using B-52s doing carpet bombing. This is way before the era of precision guided munitions. So they were just bombing the jungle, bombing that whole trail up and down the mountainous, core of Southeast Asia. But let's just stop with Southeast Asia. You mentioned Bangladesh. The thing about Bangladesh that people don't realize, Pakistan and Bangladesh were East and West Pakistan. Pakistan had a plebiscite. They were forced into it by us, I believe by the Johnson administration. And East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, voted to leave. Pakistani government had first agreed to it, but then they went to the U.S. and said, we're not happy about this. And then Kissinger and Nixon said, we'll help you out. They hinted that they would give them aid. They hinted they would intervene. And the whole point of this was that India at the time was getting all of its arms from the Soviet Union. It was not a satellite of the Soviet Union in any way, but they saw the Soviet Union as their main foreign policy ally for arms. Mm-hmm. But they were still a democracy. India was not intervening anywhere, anything else. So we basically enticed the Pakistani government into fighting to hold on to Bangladesh. That led to 10 million refugees. It led to another 270 million dead. So now we're at 3.25 million, right? It also led to some 200,000 women being raped by the Pakistani military in Bangladesh. So lay those 200,000, the Pakistanis did it. They would not have tried it if we had not said, maybe. Then you had another 200,000 for East Timor, right? Which 100% of the Indonesians would not have done that if the U.S. said no fucking way. And again, Kissinger justified all this by saying, well, these guys are allies against the Soviet Union. Pete, you know me. I am one of the old Cold Warriors. I'm one of the last of them left. We did not need to do these things in order to maintain support against the Soviet Union. It just made us morally equivalent to them. And that, in the end, was a bad thing. Let's get back to Chile, by the way. 30,000 in Chile. Or at least 30,000 in Chile. Probably a lot more than that. I'm not even sure. Another 30,000 in the dirty war in Argentina, which Kissinger supported, right? And then let's talk about Ukraine, where he was not in power, right? But Kissinger was one of those guys saying Ukraine should be in Russia's sphere of influence. Ukraine should give up land to Russia. Ukraine should be neutral. Even now, even right before he died, he changed his tune in the last 6 months. But all the way to the end, even in his years of just turning himself into a brand and being a way to make money at Kissinger Associates, he was taking money from tons of Russians, from the Russian government, from the Chinese, their government, from all these bad people. And because of his perceived position in the establishment and as a sage of American policy, he was still encouraging shitty behavior right up until he was 100 years old. And that is the story of Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger basically turned himself into a machine to have proximity to power and to money. And everything that he did was to tell bad actors what they were doing was okay and throw a scrim of respectability and a dash of intellectual bullshit behind it so that they could justify what they wanted to do.
Let me read again from Spencer Ackerman's piece, get your take. In Southeast Asia, Kissinger destroyed, but in Chile, he helped build a template for the world in which we currently live. On September 4th, 1970, Chileans elected Democratic Socialist Salvador Allende for their president. Allende's program was more than redistributionist. It demanded reparation from the U.S. for exploiting it. Chile is rich in copper, and by the mid-1960s, 80% of its copper production was controlled by American corporations, particularly the firms Anaconda Copper and Kennecott. When Allende nationalized copper mining assets held by two companies, Allende informed them he would deduct estimated excess profit from a compensatory package he was willing to pay the firms. It was this sort of unacceptable policy that prompted Kissinger's remark during an intelligence meeting about 2 months before Allende's election. I don't see why. Oh my God, I'm doing Bernie Sanders as Kissinger.
Yeah,
I can't do it. I can't do it. He said, I don't see why we need to stand idly by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its people. Chileans elected Allende. Allende was going to hurt the profits of American copper companies, and he was closer to socialism than capitalism, more importantly. And Henry Kissinger and a whole bunch of powerful Americans didn't like that. And so what did they do?
They killed him, or they helped him be killed. And then they brought in Pinochet, who was as close to a fascist as you could possibly be.
Is it Pinochet or is it Pinochet?
Pinochet is what Chileans I know call him.
Okay.
That may be trying to help out an American. I'm not sure. But and that quote, by the way, was at the tip of my tongue. I was about to say that quote. It really gets at Kissinger. He didn't give a shit about democracy or about regular people. It didn't matter to him. Kissinger was like a salesman of himself to be close to the center of power. And really, as far as he was concerned, that nobody really mattered except what American presidents thought of him, or if the foreign policy establishment or the business establishment in the United States loved him. And I mean, if you look at Kissinger, it's so weird that he's got this reputation of being this like amazing foreign policy guy. Henry Kissinger is somebody who he wrote a really amazing book. Credit where due. This is where Kissinger deserves credit. I will actually go there. He wrote a book called Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy in 1957. It was a democratic answer to crazy Republican foreign policy when it came to nuclear weapons. Republican foreign policy was that you want to you go nuclear no matter what. Eisenhower. We don't need conventional forces. We just nuke the shit out of everybody. Kissinger's ideas in that book, which were around with other people too, was to go with the idea of containment and sort of moderated foreign policy with military, cultural, economic, everything put together. It's actually quite a good book. I suggest everybody read it. It's great. At the same time, like, really his only other serious achievement was to be involved in the SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty in 1969, right? That's it. And he was part of a whole team with that. It wasn't like he did this himself. The 73 war in the Middle East, he did a bunch of shuttle diplomacy, which people go, oh, that was amazing. Well, any American Secretary of State would have done the same thing. But if you look at like how badly, the things he did badly, obviously Vietnam, obviously Cambodia, Vietnam, that war ends 6 to 7 years earlier without Kissinger around. Obviously Cambodia, supporting in Pakistan, so, all the things we just named, Timor, Chile, everything else. All those things like really hurt American foreign policy because it put us on the same place as the Soviet Union. It basically said, you're just realpolitik, you don't give a shit about anybody else. It's just this competition for power. You're willing to cede whole chunks of the world to the Russians, right? That, before the Helsinki Act happened under Ford, the U.S. officially under Kissinger and Nixon was like, we don't give a shit about what happens in the Soviet Union. I mean, Kissinger went so far as to say, if they put Jews into gas chambers in the Soviet Union, it is not an American concern. Maybe a humanitarian concern. This is Henry Kissinger, whose family fled to Kristallnacht, who does not give a shit about Jews in gas chambers, right? And this gets at like just sort of the cold, perverse sort of nature of him. Kissinger was in a way, he's like an early MAGA Paul. He didn't care what he'd said or did as long as he got to be in the center of action.
Right.
Right. And if you look at what happened after him, right? Ford comes in and starts to go, why the fuck are we not helping dissidents in the Soviet Union? That's fucking crazy. These people they're like us. They want freedom. Kissinger sort of gets eased to the side, eventually gets eased out. Brzezinski comes in under Carter and says, wait a minute, like, we're doing all this détente stuff, which is great, it's fine, but you have to verify that the Russians are doing what they say, and you have to support these Polish dock workers and these Romanians who don't want to get flayed alive by Ceausescu. And you have to live your foreign policy has to reflect the system you believe in to some extent. And by the way, Brzezinski then goes and starts the arms buildup that everybody gives Reagan credit for. Brzezinski and Carter started this sort of moral foreign policy based upon military power, at least to be clear, a more moral foreign policy.
Fair enough.
Based on military power that Reagan then picks up and under George Shultz runs with. And they start pushing the Soviet Union to the wall because now the Soviet Union isn't just looking at it in terms of, or is forced not to just look at it in terms of flat out military power. Now there's this moral dimension that is starting to hurt them. They're starting to have dissidence. Kissinger, for instance, denigrated Solzhenitsyn when he was at his peak. By the way, George Shultz, to go back to him.
Who's that, Reagan, Solzhenitsyn?
Solzhenitsyn, Kissinger just denigrated him. Like, F this guy. Even though...
Who was it?
Solzhenitsyn was a writer in the Soviet Union.
Oh, okay.
Who came to America eventually, but he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. Yeah, he wrote a series of samizdat books that became huge in the Soviet Union and really undermined the communist regime, right? But George Shultz is the guy who also negotiated the Taiwan Act with China that did the one state, the two states, one country system.
Right.
That ratified what Kissinger and Nixon had kind of started. But like later on, Shultz is the one who really put it on a firm foundation. It was all personalities before that. After that, it became the cornerstone and still is the cornerstone of American foreign policy, right?
Reagan's Secretary of State, George Shultz?
Reagan's Secretary of State. Yeah, he did this with China. So the reason there's stability somewhat between Taiwan, China, and the U.S. is because of what Shultz did, right? You look at Brent Scowcroft, who presided over the end of the Soviet Union. You look at Jake Sullivan, who's presiding over a world almost torn apart, American foreign hegemony almost torn apart by Trump. All these people were vastly better secretaries of state. Colin Powell was a better secretary of state. John Kerry was a better secretary. Hillary Clinton was a better secretary of state. Kissinger, though, was a brand and made himself into this cultural figure
right.
of supposed sagacity. And when you look at the record, he often really sucked.
Right.
And when you read his stuff from the last 30 years, it's such anodyne bullshit.
Really?
It's bullshit. It's terrible. His books are unreadable. They don't tell you, and the historical judgments in them are often like really, like just bullshit. He presents himself as a Metternich. Metternich is the guy after the Napoleonic Wars who set up the state system in Europe, both good and bad. I think mostly bad, but at least Metternich, he felt like his main job was to keep the peace. And Metternich's peace lasted for 30 years after the Napoleonic War.
Clemens von Metternich, the former interior minister of the Austrian Empire.
Yeah, he was really the foreign minister, I think would be the better way to put it. But he was called the Concert of Europe, and he basically set up a state system that limited interstate conflict. And it worked for a long time. Well, Kissinger, even though in his own, I've read his PhD thesis, he critiques Metternich, but then he pretends he is Metternich for the rest of his career. And it's just such a sales job.
Yeah, a sales job of a personality, of a brand that he became, that he created for himself. But what you're saying, he wasn't nearly as smart as people thought he was, that he thought he was. And you compare him to other secretaries of state who were more effective. And you judge these things in many ways through a lens of history on the outcome of a foreign policy, of a major decision. And you can look back and you can do a pretty accurate judgment, I think, of American power and where it was used effectively and ineffectively.
Yeah,
to say the least.
And by the way, I think that Kissinger, some of his greatest triumphs actually came because he was with Nixon. Nixon was the one who thought of the idea, as far as everything I know. Nixon's the one who said, we got to peel the Chinese away from the Russians.
Well, Ackerman gives credit to somebody else, I think, in the State Department for that opening. I forget where it is. But yeah, I mean, like Kissinger gets the credit for Nixon's China opening. But they're saying he shouldn't have even gotten credit for that.
Here's the thing, is that there's this weird game that people play, not Ackerman, but you see this a lot. Like I'm seeing now, I was reading today, a guy who, I shouldn't be mean to him, I won't say his name, but he's a PhD program guy who was all over Twitter saying, no one talks about the agency of other nations. Pakistan didn't have to fight in Bangladesh. The Vietnamese didn't have to fight us in Vietnam. So it's partly their, the local agency that goes on with all this stuff. Or they say, well, you can't say that this stuff happened because of Kissinger, because Nixon was president, right? All of that, to some small extent is true. But in the end, Kissinger pushed for all these things, right? The bombing in Cambodia, Melvin Laird, super hardline Secretary of Defense under Nixon. Melvin Laird knew that as early as 1965, Kissinger was saying Vietnam was unwinnable. He knew this. So when Nixon and Kissinger said we're going to do this, and there was Nixon was kind of teetering either way, but Haldeman and all those idiots wanted to do it to show toughness. And Laird, who was a super hard ass hawk, said, why would we do this? It's not going to help us win. So, like, we're going to kill a bunch of people, and for what? We're going to we're going to destabilize everybody else. It's fucking stupid. And Kissinger weighed in on the side of Haldeman and those guys. Why? Because he knew they had the ear of Nixon. He wanted to be in with the guys closest to Nixon. And even though he knew it was awful and bullshit, he didn't care.
Right.
It didn't matter to him. You know, Kissinger was a climber, and that's it. And I got a story for you, a little anecdote that I am fairly sure you will never hear anywhere.
Oh, an exclusive.
About Kissinger. So at 28 years old in 1952, Kissinger is at Harvard, the grad student. And he was a high flyer, and he was a good networker. And so he started this small magazine at Harvard called Confluence. He also had a seminar. And the point of this thing was that, you know, he being from Germany, he was going to bring in a bunch of like ex-Weimar people like Reinhold Niebuhr, Hannah Arendt, Raymond Aron, etc. Right? And the point of all this was that, you know, America in the McCarthyist era, you bring in all these Weimar people and they can kind of warn us about the possibilities of fascism, Nazism, whatever. Well, he figures out pretty quickly that these Weimar people like Hannah Arendt are not getting him into the White House. Right? This is too out there, too European, too whatever. So, you know, he's getting some cachet within the academic community, but he's got his eyes on getting into power in Washington, right? So he comes up with this idea, and this is where I say that he is kind of the progenitor for these most cynical MAGA people. He decides, you know what, like, I've got this magazine. I'm not getting much attention from it. Let's be maverick about this. And so he has a guy write an article for Confluence magazine, a guy named Ernst von Salomon. Ernst von Salomon was a Freikorps German who was a Strasserei, which means completely Nazi adjacent. He helped assassinate the foreign ministry head of the Weimar government.
Jesus.
He was part of a thing called Operation Consul, which assassinated 350 plus liberal politicians in Germany. And he has this guy who, by the way, after the war was a big critique, wrote these right-wing critiques of denazification in Germany. Kissinger puts that guy into his magazine and then got a huge kick out of it because that made him controversial, right? That's who Henry Kissinger is. So in other words, like the stuff that he's done lately, you go all the way back to the beginning. He was figuring out how to become famous by being edgy. And
his interests were supposed to be America's interests, but they were always his own interests.
100%. A complete narcissistic, out for himself guy in every possible way. And to the degree that, like, he had no loyalty to his own religious community. He had no loyalty to German Jews. He had no loyalty to American interests, really. As long as he was good. I mean, if the Soviets conquered America, Henry Kissinger would have been like, you need a guy to help out? Because, I know a guy. Like, that would be him. He was utterly cynical and totally gross. I mean, can you imagine in 1952 bringing somebody who was so hardcore the Nazis didn't trust him to write a magazine in your little magazine that's Weimar era German intellectuals writing? That is gross. That is gross and disgusting.
And early gross action by old Hank.
Well, and by the way, like, he got away with it, and then he kept doing it. And you know, he really is a terrible guy who did terrible things. And as you know, I am not a softie in foreign policy. I am okay with some pretty tough stuff.
Well,
but this Kissinger was bad combination of cynical and kind of bad at his job, but really amazing at marketing himself. And that's dangerous, as we know with the current leader for the Republican nomination.
The Vietnam War changed the way that America conducted its violent bombing campaigns, in that it created seemingly a new trajectory where you could kind of, if you're America, bomb wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted, quietly. And American presidents have done that our entire lifetime, certainly post 9/11.
Yeah, although I think what Vietnam did, though, is it drove America towards avoiding the sort of Cambodian thing. I mean, precision guided munitions come in great degree from complete disgust for what happened in Cambodia. American bombing, you can just look at Russian bombing now. American bombing is as precise as it can be generally. During the Trump administration, he literally said, "I don't care." But it's an awful thing. It's gross. It's bad. When you're bombing anybody, enemy or friend or neutral, it's always awful, right? War is bad. But I think what came out of Vietnam and out of Cambodia was a recognition that you can't do this if you want to have any sort of moral or soft power. You can't.
And I got that take from Ackerman's piece, where he writes that Kissinger was no less foundational in pushing the frontiers of where American military power could operate. It turned out the secret bombing of Cambodia and Laos, which lasted years, represented a template. And then he goes on to where at the end, he says, after 9/11, it became accepted foundational pillars of a war on terror, permitting 4 presidents to bomb for 20 years, Pakistanis, Yemenis, Somalis, Libyans, Syrians, and others.
See, I disagree with that, actually, because it doesn't describe what actually happened. America became very allergic to wars like this from 75 until realistically, until 9/11. In that period, bombing was a big deal. Reagan did it. Like, if you look at the American military campaigns of that period, they're all short, they're all very precise, and they are all short.
Yeah,
right?
But I wonder if that was given the conflicts that arose during that time period. I mean, Vietnam ends and it creates such a stain for a generation, 2 generations, that usually you don't make such a horrible mistake for a little while. But
that's my point, is that Ackerman is saying it's a template. And by the way, the U.S. was intervening and bombing and doing things like that before Vietnam. So this idea that we have always been a very sharply elbowed power.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. Although, you look at how
others would say imperialist.
We are imperialist. We're a hegemony. Yeah. My support of American hegemony is only because I think it's better than anything that would replace it. That doesn't mean I think it's good or great.
Well, anything that would replace it would be a balance.
No, it wouldn't be. That's the problem.
You're saying the balance couldn't exist? You're saying a balance, the global order does not allow for a balance. It only allows for hegemony.
Right now, yeah.
And if there's going to be hegemony, it should be us.
I think we're the least bad option, is how I would say that.
I think you're probably wrong, but I can't argue.
I mean, look at it this way. Imagine
I think Iceland should be the hegemony.
They would be fantastic, but they would lose interest after a couple months.
A couple months.
The hegemonists that would follow us would be China or Russia,
right,
or somebody similar. Right. And that's a pretty ugly world.
Well, anything else about Kissinger? There's a couple other things I want to talk to you. We've been talking for a little over half an hour, but I certainly...
One last thing about Kissinger, which I think is really important, is that you're seeing a lot of people who we don't dislike, who are saying, "Oh, Henry was a legend. Henry was this. Henry that. Clemens, Andrew Exum." A lot of people who should know better, and I think that it gets at something that our friend Henry Kissinger did, which he told people what they wanted to think about themselves, and he did this for Americans' foreign policy establishment as well. Henry Kissinger made all these people feel like there's this link to history and America's heyday, as they had this golden-hued view of what we were like 30 or 40 years ago, which, sorry, folks, I fucking remember. We weren't that great then.
Well, yeah, but I mean, do you really take those two and others in good faith, or do they strike you as they do me, to have a Kissinger-like quality to keep yourself in the room and have access. And that's why you write and say the things you do. You don't actually believe them. You just want to keep hosting different things at different ideas festivals.
Well, so it means,
and have a column in this journal or that one.
What it means, either way, it works, because what it means is that you either believe it, or to stay in the room, you have to pretend you believe.
Yeah. Well, people who do things to get invited to parties are, what do we call them?
I call them courtiers, which I think is ultimately the best term for Kissinger himself.
Oh,
but Kissinger was the ultimate courtier, right? And he created this myth about himself that everyone now, if they're going to be in those rooms, which, as you know, they wouldn't let me in those rooms for $1 million. If you're going to be in those rooms, you have to kind of tip your hat to it, or pretend to believe it, or believe it. And it gets at how good Kissinger was at being that guy. That somebody like Hillary Clinton, who as a student protested Kissinger, had to pretend that he was some elder statesman of the United States at the end. And the way he did it basically was having amongst his clients for Kissinger and Associates, American Express, FIO, Rio Tinto, Lehman, Merck, Heinz, Volvo, JP Morgan, and a whole slew of people in Russia and China, right? Kissinger actually could hand money around. He could get you a job. McClarty Associates is out there. That's a spinoff from Kissinger Associates back in the day. And so there's this whole sort of industry around him that sort of created opinion, created sort of what you were allowed to think or not think.
Well, let's be clear. I played the audio yesterday in the debate between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton in 2016. There's a famous moment where Bernie Sanders is like, "You called Henry Kissinger your friend. He's no friend of mine."
Good for him. Totally legit. But again, Bernie doesn't exist in that world. He doesn't need to. And it really,
right.
But it gets at, I just want to point out that
nobody
I personally
needs
think
to.
It's grotesque that a bunch of people in Washington are saying, "Wow, a legend is dead."
Yes, for sure.
They should be peeing on his grave the day he's in the ground.
Yeah.
If only to put out the hellfires that will be burning him.
Speaking of peeing on people's grave, another great person I wanted to ask you about. No one has been more consistently critical of Elon Musk than my friend Bill Boyle. And yesterday he was at the New York Times Deal Book gathering of powerful people. The Vice President of the United States was a guest of Andrew Ross Sorkin's on that stage. Everybody saw what Elon Musk did. He basically told the president of Disney, ABC, Bob Iger to fuck off, and everybody else that spends money should fuck off too. And it was a bizarre thing to say, because he was trying to say, you can't buy me off. And what Andrew Ross Sorkin seemingly missed is, like, you're the president of a company that is a valuable resource and has thousands of employees. It's not about you. So you shouldn't be saying these things at all and be making it constantly like, it was a ridiculous moment. Andrew Ross Sorkin really did not do a great job. And frankly, he doesn't usually. I was on Real Time with him and felt really dirty. But the point is your take, not mine.
Well, it would be the equivalent of me saying, if you don't like the fact that I let Nazis walk around in my parking lots and you don't park here, then fuck you. Right? What if I said that about my company? I'm in the parking business. I let Nazis put signs up in my parking lots. And I say, fuck you if you don't park there. You're a cabal trying to ruin my company. What am I really doing there? I'm endorsing the Nazis.
Yeah, welcoming Nazis. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Not always, but a lot of times, and it is definitely at Nazis.
Right, and so to be clear, we don't allow this in my company, but he's presenting as a free speech thing. It's a private company. Free speech is not fucking relevant to a private company. So when he's allowing all of these things in his private company that drives advertisers away, it's not a free speech issue. They don't want to associate themselves with gross content. And the fact, what he said to Andrew Ross Sorkin, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
He said, the reason I'm here, Jonathan, is because we're friends. And Andrew Ross Sorkin was like, my name is Andrew.
Right.
So already Musk is just winging it, doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. By the way, I put the thing on Twitter where he had a huge patch of hair on his face. He can't even handle the ketamine fucked up shave in the morning when he gets up. But,
he looked really not healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, he looked like Nora Desmond lead in the movie, where he's just kind of all like, doesn't really know what's going on and is kind of like having his moment. But what he said to Sorkin was, sort of Sorkin saying like, well, who's going to be object to this, or who's going to be mad about it, or whatever. He said, Earth is.
That's right.
He literally thinks that the whole planet is going to be like, oh shit, Disney doesn't want to be on Twitter, so let's not go and like go on the ride at Disney. Like, it's delusional. I didn't realize you could destroy yourself on ketamine. I think that's exactly what we're watching.
I wonder.
We're watching a guy ketamine himself into the dust before our very eyes. And if he was not worth $190 billion, no one would give a shit. No one would pay any attention to him.
Let me ask you about another powerful man. His name is Mike Johnson. He's a new Speaker of the House, and he is learning very quickly that he's going to have to actually govern and get things done as a speaker and not just a flamethrower on the back bench. And now he is moving this legislation forward that will have aid for both Israel and Ukraine, which was a deal breaker just a couple weeks ago. But now that he's speaker, seems like he's moving it forward. At the same time, I'm not giving him any kind of credit. I mean, yesterday he did this horribly. He and James Comer and others who want to impeach Joe Biden, he made these really triggering, dishonest comments, even for him, saying that the impeachments of Donald Trump were political, and this impeachment of Joe Biden is because the Republicans stand for the rule of law. I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close to what he said. So we're not giving him credit. I just bring up this point about aid to Ukraine, Israel, to let you react to how he is now as speaker and what this means for Ukraine and the country.
So it's not a done deal that there's going to be aid to Ukraine yet. But what Johnson's doing is actually, canny's probably too strong a word for it, but he's doing the obvious thing, which is he's basically saying to these guys, you can have your wild-eyed, crazy Biden thing. Go and try to impeach Biden. Fine. There's the shiny object. All the lunatics go chase after. And then he goes and meets with the Republicans in the Senate, and some very conservative Republicans in the Senate are like, do you want to be the guy who fucked up Ukraine? No, you don't. Johnson voted against aid to Ukraine a couple months ago.
Right.
But 2 days ago, he said, we cannot let Vladimir Putin win in Ukraine.
Huh.
Which is like as distinct a statement as you possibly could. I think that he, like everyone who gets to that office, once you're in it, you don't want to lose it. Right? This is the peak. And it's the worst job in Washington, but it's the best one any of these guys are probably ever going to get. And so you get in there and you start to look around and you say, pragmatically, what am I going to do to stay? And he's in a position where he has realized he has to give this a shot. Nothing gets easier. And Ukraine is popular. Aid to Israel is popular. Right? And I think that he is looking at what's going to come up when the budget again runs out in whatever it is, January or February. He's going to have a whole other fight then. And I think you get to this point where he's making the calculation, do we literally hand the Democrats back the House or not? And I think he's trying, not in good faith, but he's trying to kind of get these things out and done so that they're out of the way and it's not sitting or hanging over them in an election year. Will he succeed? It depends on whether he'll let the Democrats push these through or not. Right. And that will decide a lot of things.
Last thing I want to ask you is, I was saying this to, I think, Noel Kasler will say the same thing. I might be more of an optimist than a realist like you. You might even be a pessimist in some ways, but it is not a foregone conclusion, even though it seems like it is. And there's a lot of conditioning around this, psychology around this, that Donald Trump will be the nominee and could win again. It's not. The truth is, Iowa is starting to become really interesting. And all of a sudden, Nikki Haley has Koch money, and religious leaders in Iowa, really crazy ones, aren't supporting him, nor is the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds. And, people might be realizing that he's going to be in a lot of trouble and could possibly not win. And they want a Republican to win, and maybe the fever is breaking enough that he won't be the Republican nominee. I think he will still run no matter what, even if he's sentenced to life in prison. He still runs, and people will still, whether he's on the ballot or not, write his name in, and that's a lot of votes, I'm sure. So what are your thoughts on my optimistic theory that Nikki Haley, who's just a tiny bit better than Donald Trump because she probably would abide by the outcome of an election. could win.
She certainly would. I think she certainly would. I think Trump is not a shoo-in. I think that the trial in D.C. starts in March. It's supposed to go 6 weeks. So beginning of March to the end of, May, that's happened. He still obviously can run, whether he's convicted or not. He's going to appeal, whatever. But you can see a scenario where Haley has done a good job of blurring her more extreme positions without becoming Chris Christie. And, by the way, calling Vivek Ramaswamy a scumbag certainly gets her probably another 10,000 votes in every state. I could see it. I think it would take a lot of good bounces for her. And I think it would take a conviction for Trump for sure. But you never know. I mean, but I think it'd be tough because I think it would have to be a situation where your average MAGA person said he just can't win. I think that you'd have to get there. You'd have to get to the point where you're peeling MAGA people off.
But I don't know the schedule other than, is it Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina in the Republican primaries?
I don't know either. I've been paying zero attention to that, but I know when his trial is, and I know that things start in February. So you could, this so much is unknowable in this scenario.
I'm just wondering, only because if the first few states he doesn't win and she does, the other states.
Say she wins Iowa, New Hampshire, or 2 states at the beginning, and then his trial hits, and it just looks awful. And apparently, there's things that are going to come out in that trial. They're going to look worse than they do now. Who knows? I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, at some point, the Trump train jumps the tracks electorally. It already has once against Biden. And honestly, if you're a smart Republican, every smart Republican I know thinks that Haley would be a far better candidate against Biden than Trump will be.
Yeah, well, but you mainly talk to people who are, quote, smart Republicans, and you don't talk to a lot of MAGA people.
Sure, but these folks are like, look, you look at her. She's far more amenable.
They're about 20% of Republican voters, maybe. I heard McKay Coppins, who's pretty smart on that, are the people that you're talking about.
Right. And those folks don't love Biden, but a good chunk of those folks won't vote if it's Trump, and a good chunk of them will vote for Biden if it's Trump. So, you look at this and you think, man, they'd be crazy not to have her instead, but of course they're crazy. So we'll see. We'll see. It's going to be a really, I think, between now and July 1st, it's going to be nuts. I think it's going to be completely nuts.
All right.
That's my informed take for what it's worth.
What's that?
That's my informed take for what it's worth.
We always want your informed take here. So I appreciate it on all of these things. All right. I thank you very much for joining me today. It's really fascinating as always. We appreciate the hell out of you, Bill. Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I want to say Pogue Mahone to Shane McGowan, who died at 3 a.m. this morning, London time. Amazing punk, Irish, whatever guy who wrote some of the best songs ever. And tonight I'm going to be out on the lash with the boys in downtown DC to celebrate his wake. So go listen to Shane McGowan and do yourself a favor. And the Pogues, yeah.
Thank you. Will do. Appreciate you, pal.
All right. Sláinte.
There he goes. Bill B in DC. As always great. Always love when he joins us. Go click and follow him. Click on the show links that will direct you to all of the Bill B links. You can follow him on social media. And thank you very much for listening today. I hope that you are doing good, hanging in there, having a good weekend, or whenever the hell you're listening to this. And I hope that you will go out and thank Bill, as always, for joining us. All right. I will talk to you later. Thanks so much. I love you. Goodbye.
When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think your driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot they'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.